Hello everyone! Today we have an overview of JPRC Signboard 25 drone based on the results of its 6-month operation. The images of original animals on the cover, in this case, are by no means my opinion from those who bought this device, not a reference to the movie Mimino and not a hidden advertisement for TBS products. I thought, to be honest, one of the remote I use is really TBS, but not because this is best remote control on the earth, according to some imperial bloggers, but mainly for the reason that there is a fixation of central points and rigid springs on things, which allow you not to overdo with its gas. Also, this is by no means an allusion to any of my colleagues in work and research with whom I had disagreements on philosophical and other issues. In general, all the coincidences are random, but everything is simple. With the pictures, in the process of creative search, the AI generated several pictures on the topic, and I didn't want them to sink into oblivion along with work on the own who was doing it. The concept of today's review is as follows. Firstly, do not repeat the unpacking and advertising reviews of Signboard 25, which are already available online in the sufficient quantity, i.e., in the terminology of academic higher education, to present some elements of review novelty, namely to describe the results of operating this drone indoors, i.e., in fact, we are talking about typical operating conditions for use in the city. When operating in the countryside, you can safely add the effects of interaction with the branches, grass and road dust. Secondly, the review will mainly focus on the design of the fuselage, since there is my design engineering profile in the best, and I'm more competent than in matters of the rest of the drone's equipment. Thirdly, since the main content of the value analysis for cost engineers channel consists of the lectures and cases in the field of value analysis, I wouldn't be logical to consider an example of using this analytical tool in the content of Blogger's Toolkit when creating a product review.
As you already understood from the name, but perhaps you didn't understand from the cover, we're talking about the JPRC Signboard 25 model. In general, the drone and the cover, in this case, is nothing more than the aggregate state of the Signboard 25 at the end of each training session, i.e., if you hope that your drone will look like in commercials, advertisements and on the manufacturer's website, then you are mistaken, at least with regard to this model, but about it below. So I propose to proceed directly to the review, which will be consisted of two parts. First, classic bloggers analytics, and second, analytics using value analysis tools. So, section 1, classic product overview. First, mainframe. The function of the mainframe is to accommodate electric motors, flight controller, power connectors, a secondary frame, propeller protection, camera protective cover, and video and control antenna, and a battery. In general, it can be said that in most of the final loads in flight during falls are perceived by the mainframe. Component weight 0.018 kilograms. Structural material is a carbon fiber. If you looked at the slice, you can see the layers thickness 2.65 millimeters, taking into account the coating. Without coating, the assume equal to 2.54 millimeters or 0.1 inches. If you look from the side, you can see the layers, 7 layers, i.e. 0.336 millimeters or 0.014 inches. In my design engineering practice, I have come to across 0.33 millimeters layers for the domestic purpose, i.e. 3 layers give 1 millimeter. In general, the power frame turns out by something close to this. Even on the cut, it seems that the outermost layers are somewhat thicker, which also has an analog in domestic technological processes. When prepregs with a higher degree of impregnation with a binder are used, all their outer layers. The next, manufacturing technology. Machining and installation of fasteners. In this case, we are dealing with milling with a finished molded carbon fiber sheet, most likely hot formed. Chamfer along the perimeter, matte black enamel is applied, so the carbon fiber structure isn't visible on the plan view. The holes are simple, there are caps, there is some kind of special matte finish on the engine seats. I don't know why it's made, maybe it's created to local hardening in the area of increased vibration from the engine, but that is not sure. In general, I don't know. Who knows, you can write to me by my mail. I will definitely voice your opinion and make it for Hero Famous. In general, the modulus of elasticity is higher than on all of aluminum sheet, the density is lower, the brittleness under impact loads is higher, the price is lower when using a finished molded sheet. In short, all the charms of carbon fiber. Component tectonic coefficient equal to 1.
Regarding the terms tectonics and tectonic coefficient, I apologize in advance to professional designers, industrial designers, but from the point of view of the design engineer, which I am, in accordance with the document on education, the proposed interpretation of these terms is quite acceptable and most importantly allows them to be used in the analysis. Generally speaking, an attempt at a more detailed analysis of the concept of tectonics will be given in the issue number 16, Product Design Concept in the context of the design-to-cost methodology. Therefore, within the framework of this review, I propose to limit myself to an abbreviated explanation. The design is classical or conditionally ideal from the point of view of tectonics, i.e. the design the appearance of which fully corresponds to its internal structure and powers him or force him. Will have a tectonic coefficient equal to 1. A more detailed explanation of the concept of tectonics will be given in Block 1 of the training program Professional Analytics in Blogging, Van Analysis and Reviews and Unboxing or Unpacking. Unless, of course, you sign up for it. The only thing that should be added in our case is that in aviation industry, including unmanned aircraft, there are strict weight restriction and almost all structures have a tectonic coefficient equal to or close to unity or to 1, i.e. They do not have any design frills. In the process of thinking about the tectonics coefficient item as well as in the framework of work of issue number 16, devoted to the design issues, I analyzed the standard form of design analysis offered on websites with relevant topics. Generally speaking, I didn't find anything fundamentally new in them compared to the analysis that is performed within the framework of a conditional, classical reviews as well as a value analysis. Moreover, unlike the specialized design literature, there was no mention of the concept of tectonics in any of these forms. As a result, with I come heard, I introduced in the analysis process the only, but in my opinion, sufficient characteristic reflecting the design properties of the analyzed object, namely the tectonics coefficient.
The next, possible damage. In front of you are traces of frontal impact into the ground. As you can see, the carbon fibers stick out of the fracture site, which is better not to touch with your fingers because they are quite sharp, but at the same time the pylon closest to the impact site doesn't not break. In general, I have no complaints about the survivability of the frame. This damage was caused by a fall from the great height in the gym and a situation of loss of video signal. In general, it was an unreasonable load, so you probably won't have such damage during normal operation. Minor damage in the frame is also possible, which however is likely to develop during operation. For example, in this case, there was a blow and a crack in the upper layer, possibly on the second layers. It's useless to repair this part because the modulus of elasticity of carbon fiber in any case will be higher than the glue or adhesive tape in which you wrap it, and all the loads which in case of transfer to the frame In general, you just need to fly and get high until it breaks. In general, this is a typical local damage to the frame of models with longer beams or pylons. In general, this frame has a pretty good ratio of thickness and length of the beam pylon in terms of survivability. Retail price about $15. It wouldn't attribute this part to consumables. One spare frame is quite enough. Necessity for self-improvement. No modification of the main frame is required. If you replace the damaged frame with a new one, you will have to replace all the fasteners on it, rearrange the battery strap brackets, rearrange the flight controller on the vibration supports, and fix the fasteners on the flight controller. In my opinion, the easiest option is any nail polish that you find on your wife's or your girlfriend's shelf. Firstly, because there is already a brush there, and secondly, you don't need to buy a can of paint of plumb and sealant for the sake of single contour. You will also need to paste a new rubber battery pad on the frame and reinstall the button power connection, silicone vibration supports, and reinstall all 4 motors from the old frame. In general, it was not fatal, but for example, it took me to a whole evening, especially the threaded bushing with the flanges and the pressed and the carbon fiber from the inside of the frame. They must first be removed from carbon fiber and then pressed with something hard into the recesses of the frame, of the new frame. The secondary frame or propeller protection. This element is called propeller protection on trading platforms. As we can see, it doesn't have significant rigidity before installation. However, the power one, since firstly for landing gear, struts and fix on it, to which there are several questions. Secondly, the camera image processing unit is fixing it. Thirdly, it accommodates and protects from external influences the wires that go to the flight controller and the power connector. Thus, in my opinion, it would be more correct to call this element an additional or secondary frame, since it becomes relatively stable only after connecting on the power frame through 6 attachment points. And focuses on protecting the wires from external influences, since one of the strengths of this drone is that they implement it quite well. The wire protection function is distributed between the power frame and the secondary frame, which isn't bad because this issue is very important, especially if you fly in a group and your colleagues accidentally or not accidentally decides to cut you along with your wires. This is especially true if you fly the device for 5 times lighter than them, and in addition at a lower speed. In fact, we are talking about the case where a beginner or just a slow person, a boring type, finds himself on the same platform with those who crave speed and have been flying in the simulator all week to finally experience a full dose of adrenaline and real Sunday flight. So, by external influences, I mean other drones and various obstacles on the field. Methods of dealing with external influences are different. For example, some wrap pylons or beams with electrical tape. To protect the motor's power wires from their own and other people's screws or propellers in case of collision. For this model, due its compactness and length, such protection is not relevant, at least until today has been to such damage. There is no protection in terms of protecting the wires that run from the battery, and there can be protection for such drones. If they are cut off, they will have to repeat it by a new battery. On this drone, there was a problem with the balancing connector getting in the propeller. The connector was torn off and crumbled. I had to buy a new one, but since the contacts remained in relatively good condition, I didn't have to solder anything. I additionally reinforced them with superglue and forgot about it. In order to prevent it from the getting, you can buy silicone hairbands and fix the balancing connector before takeoff. And I didn't forget about this problem too. Overall, I would rate the protection of the virus as good, at least compared to the 100 or 125 gram mini whoops, which also have an O3 camera, like the Signboard 25. For example, in my Power 20 pocket, the power connector hangs amicably from the outside as takeoff weight counterparts. Respectively, after one of my colleagues on the shop floor takeoff hacked and without any protection, a drone fell, the frame cracked, battery flew off the power connector was simply turned off by the impact. I had to order a new one and solder the power connection. I'm also planning to do a mini review of the Power 20 Pocket and I'll give you at least one reason why I probably shouldn't buy it. Here the power connector is recessed and securely fastened, so there will be no such problem, and this is good. In case of a serious fall, the battery flies off on the direction the drone, the order the camera flight on the third, the battery connection or disconnected from the connector. On the fuselage in general everything happens as it should. The pleasure of searching for all these elements on the field where the next group of pilots are already waiting for departure. We've gone to beat the site, so let's back to our ship. Namely, to describe the characteristics of the secondary frame. Components weight 0.04 kilograms or 40 grams. Well, the structural material of the secondary frame isn't specified, but it's obviously either ABS or polypropylene. The manufacturing technology is injection molding with integrated fasteners. At the attachment points to the power frame, threaded fasteners used on the secondary frame structure, which are installed in the injection molding equipment. Component tectonic coefficient equal to 1. Possible damage. I must say that the secondary frame turned out to be the most fertile ground for a review, not only in terms of analyzing the list of possible damages, but also in terms of what one of the heroes of the novel, Three Men in a Boat, to say nothing on the dock, called to remember with a kind word. The one who designed, evaluated the integrity of the composition from the point of view industrial design, conducted tests of this component, as well as a marketer who decided that the ideal way to interact with the consumer throughout the product's life cycle would be not only the sale of spare propellers and batteries, but also the sale of spare of secondary frames. By the way, the issue of the interaction with the consumer model during operation, namely the constant sale of breakable frames and making a significant part of the profit on this and other consumables, as many of other marketing issues on the content of the design to cost methodology based on the value analysis. You can find out the issue number 15, product marketing concept in the context of design to cost methodology. And if it hasn't yet been released by this time, then subscribe to my channel and get acquainted with the previous issues and practical cases of the educational course Cost Engineering. So let's try to reproduce the life cycle of the secondary frame in the context of its typical damage. It must say right away that this life cycle, as a rule, doesn't exceed 10 landings or even 5. I.e., in fact, if you take a standard 3-hour workout with 2 grounds flying about 4 to 5 minus, after the maximum of an hour and a half you need to change the frame or switch to a spare drone. In general, the average consumption of secondary frames was about 1 secondary frame per training session. provided that I went to training with 2 Cyanber 25 drones and another spare mini-whoop and tried to alternate them so that their damage is about the same. Possible damage number 1. The frames for this design come in 2 versions, gray and black. From the point of view of the characteristics of the material, there is no difference, just a different hue. On this frame, we see crack in the area of the landing gear supports, if you can call them that. Rubber cushions or buffers are installed on them, which give nothing but increased friction, obviously according to the engineer's idea. The device should slide less thanks to them. This function, in my opinion, is absolutely useless, because there is nowhere for him to slide besides these supports simply peel off after a couple of flights, especially on the nose and tail supports, after they touch to the ground of a couple times. From the point of view of absorbing mechanical energy during landing, they are absolutely useless, which resulted in the appearance of the already mentioned cracks. I must say that there is a sharp edge here, which is concentrated, and cracks almost always appear at the same place. On the one hand, the crack took the shortest part, and the other, oddly enough, the longest in place, with the cross-sections and stiffness are much higher. The main load during landing is transferred to the main carbon fiber frame from the landing gear supports along the shortest path, i.e. here for the central attachment points, which, as you can see, I have specially reinforced because they are threaded fasteners simply break out of plastic, which we will see the following samples. These are 6 connection points of the secondary and main frame in total. As practice has shown, there is no special points in fixing the front or rear points with glue, firstly because on the low load, and secondly the board on which the power connector is soldered and the capacitor may not fit into its place when assembled in the area of the rear supports. Possible damage number 2. On the sample number 2, the fasteners was just broken off. I thought the installation site was reinforced with glue. By the way, the glue most suitable for this purpose turned off the glue for repairing rubber boards. B7000 and other thick adhesives do not have a special effect. In addition, on the second frame, we see cracks in the area of the fasteners and the tail section. The remaining injuries are generally similar to the first sample. So, the possible damage number 3. On the next instance, the front landing gear support flew off from the frontal impact, as well as a crack in the area of front mounting points. And such damage leads to the element starting to dangle and hitting to the propeller during landing. It's better to simply break off dangling elements so that they do not interfere with the propeller. Possible damage number 4, 5 and 6. The analysis of subsequent instances demonstrates a consistent reduction of the size of the secondary frame during training, i.e. as a result you simply fly on a lightweight device relative to the basic design, which is depicted on the cover of our issue. However, if we consider the ratio of the payload mass and other elements to be the main criterion for evaluating a drone, then this trend can definitely be considered positive. Possible damage number 7. Of course, in this case, we need a slightly simpler and cheaper option. For example, energy absorption by a protective buffer, which in this case is implemented in the form of several layers or double-sided adhesive tape. But in normal situation, it can be implemented as a standard rubber part, similar in shape to this Scotch buffer. As we can see, even installing such a makeshift buffers doesn't save, and when they fallen from the height about 5 meters and the right landing gear, the plastic secondary frame collapsed. Although the weight of the equipped drone is about less than 250 grams. Possible damage number 8. The variant of frame destruction is interesting because the destruction occurred almost symmetrically on the port and starboard sides, and not along the least weak section in the area of the landing gear racks, but in a completely different place, where the frame, generally speaking, has no rigid elements and should simply slightly deformed without subsequent destruction. So, the retail price of this element is about $5, a necessity for self-improvement. Let's just say that I tried several times to strengthen the protective arcs of the propellers without various types of adhesives and resins, wrapped them with 7 layers of double-sided adhesive tape, after which the droid looks like a fat bike. That results is zero. Activities that are dangerous to health and associated with wrapping arcs with impregnated fiberglass, dipping into a bucket with bitumen, and etc. I brushed aside. I simply resigned myself to the fact that the remaining resources wouldn't have to fly off and stops until the stops that were presented above, with all consequences in the form of additional consumptions of propellers, etc. The next, camera protective cover. The protective casing is mounted on silicone vibration supports, which, by the way, are also interesting structural elements, since they are not installed in working condition in the state of delivery. What do I mean by that? In flight, they performed their role perfectly, absorb all these vibration supports as a slighted impact, fly out of these seats, after which the load is transferred to the coaxial cable of the camera, which of course isn't designed for this. In general, I tore this cable out of the seat, but surprisingly it remained functional. I thought it was one of the 2 cable fasteners on the video processing unit was broken. So after that I installed this damaged cable and module on the Power 20 pocket, in which the camera and the video processing module are mounted in a single frame. And where a situation of repeated vandalism of the cable is unlikely. For the Signboard 25, accordingly, we had to purchase another O3 air unit. So these vibration supports are hollow inside. Therefore, if you've read it on the line through them, in the case of freights, it's advisable to buy something of high quality so as to counter a vibration support after each fall. In the case of the line, I do not know, I used only freights. We get all-in-one connection that protects coaxial cable from the unreasonable loads. Since the conversation turned to vibration supports, we know that vibration supports of a different design, already made of rubber and not silicone, are used to install a flight controller. So, component weight is 1 gram. Structural material of the protective casing isn't specified, but obviously it's also like secondary frame, either ABS or polypropylene. As a manufacturing technology is injection molding. Component tectonics coefficient equal to 1. So, possible damage. In general, the casing is quite durable, but in the case of unreasonable loads, for example, a drone falling from a great height, even on a rubberized floor, it can break in the camera mounting area, as in this case, i.e. obvious stress in the part have already been created by the tightening the camera. They have developed stresses from deformation and similar cracks. In general, this case atypical, so you should have a couple of spare casing just in case, but no more than a chance that you will not need them at all. In addition, the disadvantages of such a casing compared with the same Power 20 pocket and similar drones, for example of Jeopardy Dark Star 20, should be attributed to the fact that their frame protects the camera body in case of a strong front impact, side impact and flip, and the Signboard 25 casing provides protection only in case of flip and side impact, So even with a light filter installed, you can damage the camera body at the attachment points of the filter. Break the light filter of camera lens. The original camera body not be purchased as part of the new O3 model searched for during disassembly. Not original 3D printed can be found on AliExpress. Repairs will be quite expensive, in particular about $20–25 for unoriginal camera body, plus a new light filter. By the way, I do not recommend buying the cheapest filters from dubious manufacturers, which are sold individually at the price of from $4 to $5, since they are not even fixed in the camera body. Especially on non-original ones, their impact resistance is not important in this case, since you will simply lose them immediately after takeoff. Normal filters are usually sold as a set rather than one at a time, and secondly, they cost about $8 or above per price. So, retail price of this part is $3. Necessity for self-improvements, outline of vibration support. So, the next is antenna and transmitter mounting brackets. Component weight is 1 gram. The structural material of the antenna mounting elements isn't specified, but obviously it's also like the protective casing and the secondary frame, either ABS or polypropylene. The manufacturing technology is injection molding. Component tectonics coefficient is equal to 1. Possible damage. Of the possible damages, only deformations of the walls of the cavities in which the rubber antennas buffers are installed. In general, the parts are quite simple and reliable, and their destruction is unlikely. Retail price about $3. Necessity for self-improvement is absent. The next, plug connectors, controllers, and video processing unit. Antenna buffers, battery fusion and vibration supports of the camera case, camera cover. Component weight is about 2 grams. Construction material, rubber, silicone. Manufacturing technology, injection molding. Cutting from a sheet, battery pad, buffers of chassis supports. Component tectonic coefficient is equal to 1. Possible damage. Of the possible damages to the rubber components, to have identified based on the results of operation. The first, the plug of the USB connector of the flight controller isn't fixed on the open position in any way, and over time, due to its size, and simply gets lost. Actually, I can't demonstrate it because it got lost. The plug of the O3 model mounted on the secondary frame has a larger size and weight, which may not be very good from the point of view of weight culture, but it's good from the point of view of operation. In addition, in the open position, according to the design engineer's idea, it should be fixed on a rubber rod with a tip that protects from falling out. However, during operation, due to the destruction of the secondary frame, this plug must be rearranged, and when rearranged, the rubber rod either comes off the first or second time. However, this plug is still an example of a well-designed component. It has special protrusions and doesn't fall out even under severe overloads. In general, the rubber rod isn't really needed. The antenna's rubber buffers almost never fall out in impact, so their design can also be considered successful. Retail price of this component group is $4.1. Necessity of self-improvement. At the first change of the damaged secondary frame, you can remove the rubber rod from the plug of the O3 model connector. The next, regarding to other components, namely of the flight controller, connectors, antenna model, electric motors and propellers, I will not go into detail. I will only note that there is no complaints about their work at all, except perhaps the TBS transmission model, which has a button, which is a metal plate glued to an adhesive film, which in turn is glued to the board. The button is essentially disposable, and if you try to bind with shaking hands in poor light, then it breaks very easily. Isn't entirely clear that what prevents TBS from installing an ordinary mechanical button similar to the one installed of the AFT part of the drone. However, if you have wiring without insulation at the end, then if the button is turned off, you can simply close to the contacts with it. I thought this is of course sad, especially considering that TBS positioning itself in comparison with the manufacturers of LRS equipment, like an iPhone and compared to Android. This position raises some doubts. In addition, a flaw such as a dangling TBS transmitter was identified. The fact is that the transmitter seat is either designed out of size or they are universal for different types of transmitters, but the transmitter isn't really installed tightly, but in fact it just dangles, which under conditions of vibration load on the fuselage of the drone sooner or later will lead to destruction in the soldering area. The problem is solved by inserting a small piece of double-sided tape between the transmitter and the bracket to which it's mounted. We will not consider the remaining components such as the flight controller, fasteners, electric motors, connectors, and harnesses on the antenna of the TBS transmitter in detail. And I will immediately transfer their characteristics to the general table of initial data, which we will consider below. In general, just know that these characteristics are there. So, based on the results of a conditional sample products review, a table of general initial data has been formed, which will be used by us in the future when performing product review with value analysis tools. Let's focus on the content of this table. In fact, this table summarizes the results of the analysis within the framework of the classical review, i.e. the mass of components, their quantity, materials used, manufacturing technology, and retail sale price. The composition of the table can be adjusted, supplemented, depending on the analyzed product. However, the columns shown in this table, in my opinion, constitute a mandatory minimum. The purposes of the table of general initial data is to evaluate the amount of the initial data and understand which of the most suitable value analysis tools for a blogger review we can use in our review and which are not. In this case, the initial data is sufficient to use such tools as structural model, the construction of the AQS diagram, and the application of the factor research method. In this case, we do not have any real data to determine the degree of novelty compared to the previous general product, but a demonstration of the use of this method will start be applied, but more on that below. Further, based on the information from the table of general initial data, as mentioned above, the initial data for analysis will be grouped at two levels. First, the product level, and second, the fuselage level. And also structural model and aqueous diagram for the two levels, which will be discussed below.
Due to the academic habit, I still can't resist making a small digression and trying to somehow classify the analytical tools used in the bloggers within the framework of a conditional classic video review, namely expert evaluation methods. In addition, it should be noted that the methodology of expert evaluation, or more simply expert review methods, is widely used not only in blogging, so the issue is probably one of the key on today's issue. Any of students can familiarize themselves with the list of methods used in the framework of expert assessment, the stages and recommendation for analyzing the results, since they are presented in sufficient volume of the internet. However, within the framework of the table below, we will consider the methods recommended in the open sources, firstly from the point of view of applicability within the framework of the blogger's activities. Secondly, it's in the context of determining the parameters of interest used in the value analysis, such as relative significance, relative relevance, relative satisfaction, on the basis of which the quality implementation indicator can be calculated. Looking ahead, I will say that not all the mentions or methods often referred to as expert assessment methods are suitable for us, but this is also discussed below in the table of expert assessment methods. So, As part of the classification into individual and collective expert evaluation, everything is simple. If there is one blogger, then the assessment is individual. If there is a two or more, as an example in a Top Gear show, then we are dealing with a collective expert evaluation. The advantages and disadvantages of both approaches are, I think, obvious. From a mathematical point of view, there are larger for sample, i.e., the more experts, the smaller the margin of error, so it seems that I should now recommend the urgent creation of teams or review bloggers to improve the accuracy of the assessment. So, next we'll proceed directly to the table which lists the methods of expert assessment or expert evaluation. It should be noted at once that, for example, the paired comparisons method, which will be presented in this table, has already been mentioned in the framework of training course Cost Engineering in issue number 11, Engineering Transition, Significance Assessing Methods for Function and Their Carriers. In addition, this method is mentioned in the Value Design of VDI 2808 Standard Part 1, Significance Assessment in the Value Analysis, Methods and Tools. In the value analysis, this method is used on the process of assessing the significance of components. See the combined model tab of our Excel calculation file. Thus, we come to the conclusion that a review blogger using the methodology of expert assessment or expert evaluation becomes like a researcher using interdisciplinary research methods in his research. It was a joke. No nerds, just bloggers. Let's move to the table. I must say right away that not all the expert assessment methods listed in the table before were applied as part of the conditional classical review on the drone that we performed above. However, I believe the listeners themselves will be able to determine what was used and what was not. The purpose of forming a table of expert evaluation methods, as I mentioned above, is to describe the list of methods used in the framework of the classical review and their classification in the terms of the possibility of using a blogger to determine the relative significance, relative relevance, relative satisfaction, on the basis of which the quality implementation indicator as part of the product review using value analysis tools, i.e., can be calculated. The alternative methods which be covered in section 2 of today's release. The choice of the set of expert evaluation methods used by the blogger depends on the several main parameters. First, the type of the object of analysis. So, the costs of a smartphone and the drone are compatible. Since the probability that the smartphone will not require any additional costs and high enough, and the probability that the drone will not require additional cost, I aim for 0. Second, the blogger's qualification. Not all the bloggers have sufficient qualification to use, for example, the method of comparing geometric parameters because they simply do not know how to use a caliper, which is necessary for measuring thickness, do not understand for the manufacturing processes, and etc. And third, a review of unpacking format. Obviously, in charts or reels, you shouldn't try to cram in a complete analysis generated to the 10 methods.
So, in most cases, the blogger uses a standard set of methods which, by analogy with the certification of mechanical engineering products, where a certification basis is formed on the basis of technical assignment or technical specification, I propose to call the methodological basis of the expert assessment of the blogger's review. Accordingly, if we add the value analysis methods to the basis of the expert assessment, we'll get nothing more than methodological basis of a blogger's reviewer. Of course, this methodological framework includes only methods for analyzing the object of analysis and doesn't include the methods that bloggers study for the basic blogger course, supplemented by the course Professional Analytics and Blogging, Value Analysis and Review and Unboxing, which is presented on the Value Analysis Cost Engineering channel and within the framework of which our current case was created. The diversity of a blogger's methodological base isn't always a guarantee of content quality. However, it's obvious that it's always more interesting for the audience to watch a review former using several expert assessment methods, since such an assessment is comprehensive and can be perceived by the widest possible audience. So, let's start with a general overview of the table. The column method type indicates which of two groups, quantitative and qualitative, of methods a particular method belongs to. The column method description contains a brief description of the column required parameters, contains a list of required parameters that can be determined using this method. The column logical the structure of the conclusions that can be formulated based on the results of application of expert assessment method. Accordingly, a logical scheme for the formulation of conclusions is outlined, indicating the desired characteristics. I will provide examples of conclusion related to our object of analysis, i.e., the drawn the process of commenting on specified analysis methods. At the last column, applicability, in accordance with its name, contains information about the applicability of expert analysis methods, the framework of such a specific type of activity as review or unpacking. And to improve the visualization quality, applicable and not applicable methods are marked in different colors. Let's consider each of the expert assessment methods listed on the table separately. First, the method of paired comparisons. Method description. Most of the explanations of the method of paired comparisons that you will find in the internet are based on the example of abstract categories, i.e., you are offered to compare human needs, colors, character traits, or in general several physical objects such as office furniture, a table, an armchair, a shelf, a bedside table, and a wardrobe, which in my opinion is generally incorrect, because all of these pieces of furniture are needed and none of them can be excluded, and their purpose is different, i.e., in fact, they are not comparable. In our case, we are reviewing a physical drawn object, i.e., a physical drawn, i.e., we can compare not only several of its components, but also several functions of these components among themselves. For example, to be visually appealing, to be light, to be cheap, to be maintainable, to be allowed to fly in the city, to have a long flight time, to have a camera with high resolution and frame rate. Each of these functions is important for a specific target audience. For example, maintainability is important for someone who is engaged in drone racing, or for a father who repairs a drone operated by his child. An attractive appearance is important for the teenager who comes to a company with his drone and wants to stand out from the drones of his peers. With this color and variety of advertising labels with brands of component manufacturers, and for this he buys a drone with LED lighting, neon remotes, control case, colorful propellers, and as many brands label as possible. For a person who is shooting events from the air, the last three properties are important: degree of resolution, flight time, and shooting quality, shooting bit rate. And appearance and maintainability are of little interest to him. Therefore, if two bloggers with different target audiences, the audience of drone racers and fans of aerial photography of events, review the same device, for example on the signboard 25, using paired comparisons, they will have different review results. Thus, our method of paired comparisons is applicable in our case, but with a limitation. On the profile of the reviewer, we give a Mavic for aerial photography or events, and racing drone to a racing drone fan. Otherwise, a review using the paired comparisons method will be incorrect. Those who have already familiarized themselves with the basic theoretical concepts of value analysis have obviously guessed that the example of the pairwise comparison of functions is given for a reason, but more on this below. The essence of the calibration, I think, is obvious in the picture. An option for evaluation by one blogger, a conditional solo blogger. There is also an option for group review, which we have conditional designated above as Top Gear type review. The association method. Method description. The essence of the method is to formulate as many associations as possible, including non-obvious ones based on a question related to the components of the object of analysis of its functions. The questions of formulation can be either open, the method of free association, or closed, directed or controlled association. Standard survey method questionnaire. It's the third method in this group. Method description. The essence of the method is to fill out a questionnaire with various types of scales, open and closed questions, and etc. In modern conditions, survey forms and the survey processing can in the most cases be created as a part of paid survey services. However, for a small amount of data, an automated version is also possible in the Excel spreadsheet editor or its annex. Applicability of methods from 1 to 3 to the determination of desired parameters. Based on the results of applying three quantitative methods or expert assessment, we can determine the significance as a percentage on the basis of which is the relevance and the degree of satisfaction. For the compared components of the object of analysis, all their functions can be calculated, an example of which is given above. Examples of conclusions that a blogger can formulate. Based on the results of applying these quantitative methods of expert assessment, the blogger can formulate a number of conclusions, namely, firstly, conclusions about the current quantitative distribution of the related significance and relevance between the components, functions, and the analyzed object. For example, the relative importance determined using one of the methods of expert assessment is for fuselage is 14% and flight control in 19%, and etc. for all drone components. Secondly, conclusions about the quantitative redistribution of the relative significance are and relevance are based on the results of the introduction, exclusion of a component of functions from the design of the analyzed product compared to the product of the previous generation or competitor's analog. For example, that the component of function with a significance of 13% in an overall functionality of the drone was present in the product of the previous generation, and in the product of the new generation, the object of analysis, 10% is excluded or important. Thirdly, conclusions about the quantitative relative satisfaction of with the analyzed product compared with the product of the previous generation or competitors' analogs. For example, due to the fact that there was a redistribution of materials, weights, dimensions, but there was no corresponding redistributions of significance, and set of functions remained same. And this is very suspicious, taking into account the fact that the price of a new generation products has increased 1.5 times. The method of comparing mass-dimensional characteristics. Method description. The essence of this method, in my opinion, is sufficiently described and demonstrated in practice in the framework of today's video, namely the Classic Review. Namely, all components were weighted, although not measured. In my opinion, this is not necessary for the object of analysis. At 2.5-inch drone is quite convenient from the point of view of weighting and measuring an object. However, for larger objects, for example, a motorcycle or bicycle performing such measurements is also quite realistic. If it's not possible to perform a measurement, then data from open sources can be used as initial data which is also often quite sufficient. The next, applicability of the definition of the desired parameters for this method. In terms of applicability to the definition of the required parameters of the expert assessment, this method allows you to evaluate only the relative satisfaction. Examples of conclusions that blogger can formulate. Regarding to the blogger's possible conclusions, one can, for example, draw conclusions about the blogger's satisfaction with the mass dimensional characteristics of the component of the analyzed product and the product of the previous generation competitors analog, as well as substantiate these conclusions based on the blogger's individual preferences. 5. A method for comparing combined technical and economic parameters, unit cost per kilogram of drone, square meter of wing, square meter of drone, and etc. Method description. In essence, this method is similar to the method of comparing mass dimensional characteristics, with the only exception that the comparison is performed for more complex combined parameters that must first be calculated, i.e., in fact, another stage is added to the mentioned method of comparing mass dimensional characteristics. For example, calculating the cost of the kilogram of drone and the kilogram of bicycle, etc. Or more slightly more complex calculations, such as calculating cost per square meter of drone, and etc. Applicability of the definition of desired parameters. In terms of applicability to the definition of the required parameters of the expert assessment, this method allows you to evaluate only the relative satisfaction. Examples of conclusions that a blogger can formulate. In terms of the blogger possible conclusions, for example, we can conclude that they are satisfied with the amount of increase or decrease in the cost of the estimated combined parameter, kilogram of drone, square meter of wing of drone, and etc., taking into account the inflation over the period of generation change. From the point of view of memorability, impact of the audience, and conditional popularization of analysis, the conclusions formed using the method of expert assessment and obviously more suitable for the blogger reviewer compared with the method of comparing mass dimensional characteristics, where the audience is offered not kilograms of a drone and meters of a motorcycle, and the dry numbers and tables. Optionally, the conclusions may include comments on inflation changes in the competitive environment in the segment and other parameters that affect the conclusions based on comparisons with the previous generation or competitor's product. On the one hand, the conclusions will become more correct, but on the other hand, it will somewhat overload the context in terms of the erase of perception, of the emerging cognitive overload. The audience will have to strain a little and scratch their brains. In general, the decision to add such comments should be made depending on the target audience and the object of analysis. 6. A method for assessing the quantitative characteristics of life cycle. Method description. I am sure most of the listeners are familiar with such a concept of the product life cycle, and the listeners who are marketing specialists are obviously familiar with such a concept as the strategy interaction with the consumer after the purchase of goods, which is revealed as one of the stages of the marketing plan. Of course, the review format doesn't imply a detailed consideration of these two concepts. However, from the point of view of form and content, that is certainly of interest to the audience. These concepts can be used in a simplified form, namely the form of forming conclusions and cost for consumables, for example, annual or monthly, depending on the object of analysis. Generally speaking, in this context, it's most appropriate to introduce the concept of quantitative and qualitative characteristic of product lifecycle in the context of blogging analytics. I apologize in advance to experts in the field of the lifecycle and marketing. In such case, issue voluntarism. I'm using the concept of lifecycle. Seems offensive to them, but nevertheless I continue. A web search showed that variants close to the quantitative characteristics of life cycle are found in publication, but I didn't find qualitative characteristics of life cycle term, so the second concept can be attributed to some scientific novelty in our issue. Anyway, since by life cycle will mean something completely different from what most large and not so large researchers in their articles, and particular the cycle of consumer interaction with their purchase before disposal or resale. Neither of the two definitions has anything in common with their counterparts. So, quantitative indicators of life cycle in the context of blogging analytics include first, the number of spare parts and consumables that were needed in the case of an average intensity of operation over a certain period of time, weeks, months, years, etc. The next, average price of spare parts or consumables. Next, maintenance cost of the consumer life cycle, the cost of paying taxes and fees, the cost of storage and transportation, and the cost of disposal. The next, qualitative indicators of life cycle in the context of blogging analytics include the presence of interaction with the consumer after a purchase of goods, maintenance of operational software, availability of consumable components, availability of service centers in the region, the possibility of product disposal and environmental impact, and other stuff. Applicability to the definition of the desired parameters in terms of applicability to the definition of the required expert assessment parameters. This method allows us to access only the relative satisfaction as well as the amount of housing, amount of life cycle in monetary terms. Examples of conclusions that blogger can formulate. An example of conclusions about life cycle will be given at the end of today's issue in the conclusion section. Conceptually, the conclusions may contain accessible information about how much you will have to pay to the cost of the goods and the retail network, and, for example, an indicator of the period during which the most cost of consumables will equal around fractions of the cost of the goods. For example, within 6 months you will spend half of the cost of the drone on consumables, and a year later an amount comparable to the cost of a drone. The next, seventh method is the method of comparing the coefficient of tectonics of the design of the object of analysis. Method description. Taking into account what has already been said about the concept of tectonics above, and more will be said in issue number 16, product design concept in the context of design to cost methodology. I just want to repeat that since the content should be accessible to the widest possible audience, the concept of tectonics in this case should be simplified or popularized as much as possible. Therefore, it can be included that for the most of the most popular technically complex survey objects, such as consumer electronics, jewelry, accessories, toys, sports equipment, etc., the use of such a technique would be unnecessary, since the very explanation of the concept of tectonics and related design and engineering concepts is already a problem. Examples of analysis objects related to the consumer goods include, for example, designer furniture, in which in addition to power elements or strength elements, there is the design engineering elements that do not carry any strength function. A drone or bicycle in most cases is an example of a high-weight design culture. The value of the tectonic coefficient will almost always be close to unity. Examples of the review objects for which this method is applicable can theoretically be motorcycles, which can be roughly divided into a category of motorcycles where the mass and number of structural elements are minimized either by virtue of requirements, for example, sports motorcycles or the virtue of the naked motorcycles, concept of all other motorcycles, classics, cruisers, tourists, and etc., with the weight requirements of the structure are not so critical. I don't see any point in analyzing an assembled car from the point for view of tectonics. It's too complicated, and the logic is similar for larger objects. The tectonics coefficient, see issue number 16, in this case can be determined by various methods, ranging from the least accurate method by eye, from the sign, from the lantern, and with value analysis, which is described in a simplified way by the analogy with the case of use of value analysis access to degree of novelty, allows you to make a conditional proportion, the ratio of the number of design functions to the total number of the functions, and calculate the tectonics coefficient. Applicability to the definition of the desired parameters. In terms of applicability to the definition of the required parameters of the expert assessment, this method allows you to evaluate only the relative satisfaction, and examples of conclusions that the blogger can formulate the next. An example of conclusions may be the blogger's conclusions that come to the structural components are not involved in power and strength operational and have no functionality other than design, so they can be disentangled or replaced without loss of performance. An example of such non-functional elements are the protective forks on the secondary frame of the drone, which we have already discussed above. For a mountain bike, similar non-functional, low-functional components may include front and rear flaps of retroreflectors, and etc. Some promising researchers who are fans of motorcycles refer to silencers as such non-functional elements and perform field experiments to test this scientific hypothesis at night on the streets of the city. It was a joke. From 7 to 9 methods of comparing structural materials and manufacturing technology. Description of methods. Starting with these two methods, we move on qualitative methods and expert assessment. Therefore, I believe that provided at least superficial understanding of the meaning of the concept qualitative methods of analysis and comparative analysis, detailed commentary of the methods of comparing structural materials and manufacturing technology isn't required. The blogger, based on his level qualification as well as taking into account the level of knowledge of the target audience in the field of materials science and technology, trivially analyzes the structural material and manufacturing process of all of the most important components of the object of analysis, ideally comparing them with the material and technological process that were used in the design of the previous generation product and competitors' analogs. An example of such comparison has already been presented in sufficient detail by me using the example of the Lansophy Suffering Signboard 25. Applicability to the definition of the desired parameters. In terms of applicability to the definition of the required parameters of the expert assessment, this method allows you to evaluate only the relative satisfaction parameter. Examples of conclusion that a blogger can formulate. The logical scheme of conclusions that can be formulated by a blogger based on the results of applying these two methods, in my opinion, obvious and is summarized in the table. The blogger banally formalizes in his conclusions the level of his satisfaction with the structural materials and technological processes used in the obtain of review. It's analog of the previous generation and analogs of competitors. From 10 to 11. Methods for comparing operational visual characteristics. First, method description. These methods are essentially identical to the previous two, except that when using them, bloggers who know the methodology of value analysis will be able to more accurately describe operational and visual characteristics in relation to his colleagues who are not educated in this field. For those who have a question why, I answer. As part of the cost engineering course, which you can read on the value analysis for cost engineers website, the issue of classifying functions in the value analysis is considered and the examples of functional model formation are given, which consists, among other things, of operational and visual functions, and having formed which the blogger can easily compare the functional and visual functions of all components of the analyzed products, is previous generation and analysis. Applicability to the definition of the design parameters. In terms of applicability to the definition of the required parameters of the expert assessment, this method allows you to evaluate only the relative satisfaction parameter. Examples of conclusion that the blogger can formulate. The logical scheme of conclusions that can be formulated by the blogger based on the results of applying these two methods is completely identical to a logical scheme of methods for comparing structural materials and manufacturing technology. The next method for assessing the quality characteristics of a life cycle. Method description. The methods is essentially similar to the methods of evaluating the quantitative characteristics of life cycle, adjusted for the fact that the key elements of this method are the above-mentioned concept of qualitative characteristics of life cycle, namely iteration with the consumer after purchase of goods, including maintenance of operational software, availability of consumable components in retail network, service centers, the possibility of disposal and environmental impact, and etc. Applicability to the definition of the desired parameters. In terms of applicability to the definition of the required parameters of the expert assessment, this method allows you to evaluate only the relative satisfaction parameter. Examples of conclusions that blogger can formulate. The conclusions may contain information about how well, namely how much meets the blogger's expectation, the level of implementation of the listed qualitative characteristics of life cycle. As I mentioned above, some of the methods positioning in various sources as expert assessment methods are not suitable for use by a blogger as a part of a review of unpacking. These methods are listed at the bottom of our table. Let's consider their general concept and the reasons for their impossibility of application. The first, or the 13 in our table, is the focal object method. Description of the method. I suggest that we not focus directly on the content of the local estimation method right now, limiting ourselves to the following description. The first stage is the selection of a local or focal object. The second of the transfer to it of properties of other objects, including random ones. And the third is the evaluation of the resulting combinators of properties. In more detail, students can familiarize themselves with this method on their own, since there are quite a lot of articles on this topic on the internet. Applicability of the to the definition of the desired parameters. Generally speaking, this method will be used in solving such cases as modification of devices, creation of several designs and configurations, modification of technological processes, formation of new method of using well-known goods and services, and marketing within the framework of naming as well as invention. Thus, the correctness of the application of that method within the framework of expert assessment, relative significance, relative relevance, and relative satisfaction is controversial, and therefore we know this method are unsuitable. The second unsuitable method is a midpoint method. Method description. A brief description of the midpoint method can be summarized as follows. Two alternative solutions are formulated, one of which is less preferable, followed by the formulation of the third option, which is located between the first two in terms of preference. Applicability to the definition of the desired parameters. The midpoint method will be used in solving such cases as modification of services, creation of several designs and configuration, modification of technological processes, formation of new methods of using well-known goods and services, in marketing within the framework of naming, as well as its invention. Thus, the correctness of the application of this method within the framework of expert assessment, relative significance, relative relevance, and relative satisfaction is controversial, and therefore we know this method is as unsuitable. And last, 15, the methods of preference vectors. Method description. A set of evaluated alternative is evaluated, and for each alternative it's indicated how many other alternatives in this opinion are superior to this one. If 8 alternative options are evaluated, then the preference vector may look like this: 3, 0, 4, 8, 6, 9, 5, 2 in the vector code. Applicability to the definition of the desired parameters. Thus, the analysis performed on the basis of such a vector of preferences is essentially an analog, or rather to a slightly stripped-down version of the analysis by the method of paired comparisons. However, unlike the latter, it doesn't allow us to form an analysis in the form that we need.
Being a practicing cost engineer, I still can't resist noting that in this application area, comparative analysis types are also used to compare numerical data, which can be classified somewhat differently. That's done at our table, namely, first, horizontal comparative analysis, which can be used to identify an deviation of the actual results from the normative ones. Using the calculation or breakdown, for example, this is when the norm for an hour of work should cost $10 and the supplier's cost breakdown indicates $15. The second, vertical comparative analysis used in the analysis of the structure. For example, overhead costs should be 100% of the wage fund and they amount to 150%. And the third, trends want dimensional and multidimensional comparative analysis. Cost engineers are used a little more often than never, but those listeners who are interested in this issue, of course, can familiarize with it by themselves. Graphical comparisons tables are also complied to visually represent the analytical research data, in which the names of compared indicators as well as their quantitative and qualitative values are entered. As part of the training course Professional Analytics and Blogging, Value Analysis and Reviews and Unboxing, one of the stages of independent work is to perform a classical review of the product that you are interested in and select the most appropriate expert assessment method for your review object under the guidance of a mentor or me. The presentation of the training course contains a description of the area of acquired competences and the competitive advantages that you will have over other bloggers, the content and complexity of the training course, the format and cost. And a bonus of the student is provided with one-time online consultation by a qualified HR specialist on CV preparation, taking into account the acquired skills.
So, section 2, product overview using value analysis tools. As I mentioned above, our channel is dedicated to the value analysis and the design to cost methodology, so it will be quite logical to apply in this framework of the review, of the blogger's review, at least as a simplified form, certain analytical tools that we have already considered in the theoretical editions and cases of the cost engineering training course. In particular, the AQS diagram, also known as the relevance quality of implementation and the costs diagram, and the second, a table for assessing the degree of novelty relative to the previous generation of analogs or analogs. Let's look at the procedure for constructing an AQS diagram in more detail. This value analysis tool can be used in our review today with the following reservation. First, we will include the purchased products in the structural model, engine, battery, antennas, video model, flight controller and other electrics, but we will not consider lower levels for them, i.e., since the value analysis is, among other things, is a design engineering tool, and from the point of view of design engineering, these are separate models that we choose in a ready-made form, i.e., we cannot influence their design, but we can change the supplier, secondly as methods for determining the significance and satisfaction, the review of which was carried out by us in issue number 11 of Cost Engineering Training course. In this case, the method of expert assessment will be applied in this case. Your humble servant will act as an expert. In addition, it's possible to involve experts specifically for the specific review. The technology of structural model formation as well as assessment of the significance and satisfaction with the participation of engaged experts also exists and can be applied. The AQS diagram will be generated for the upper level with the purchase parts, i.e. similar to the abstraction level for the technical assignment, and for the lower level separately for the fuselage. Regarding the S indicator, the following should be noted. Let me remind you that S in our case is the relative average retail prices in the store, and in fact this is only information available to the buyer, since the prices at which the manufacturer buys these components are firstly wholesale, and secondly not one will ever tell you, since it's a trade secret. Accordingly, the blogger finds himself in a situation where the total amount will not match to the price of the drone assembled in the store. Well, I suppose no explanation is required here. It's obvious that if you assemble the drone from components purchased separately in the store and assemble it yourself, then this particular model will turn to the somewhat cheaper, about $400, and the price of the manufacturer's website of about $460. As we have already noted, the manufacturer buys components including purchased parts at wholesale price, so it's incorrect to consider its margin to be equal $16 or $17. However, for me personally, as a person who does not enjoy soldering, it's very tempting to overpay this amount and get a finished product, i.e. the mention of $60 or $70 can be considered compensation for a personal time spent and self-assemble on the drone. This logic, of course, isn't universal, and is valid only for relatively simple products such as drones. For example, if you buy a new car, a plane or submarine for individual spare parts and then assemble them, it's unlikely that a similar ratio will take place, but I hope that none of the listeners will do so. Nevertheless, in order to apply the value analysis tools, we need the sum of the prices of the individual components to match the price of the component assembly. Accordingly, firstly, we must give a name to this deviation, for example, distributable deviation, and secondly, as you can already see from the name, we will distribute this deviation about other components in proportional to their magnitude. Of course, in the case of real calculation during product development, such voluntarism is unacceptable, but in the case of blogger analysis, it's quite unacceptable. The general speaking is one of the differences between consumer analysis using value analysis from design engineering or economic analysis, where the S parameter in the AQS and 6S diagram is used in more cases to indicate relative direct costs. Therefore, the values in the retail price column indicated in the general and targeted tables of the initial data will differ by the amount of the proportionally divided value of the distributable deviation. The retail price taken into account the distributable deviation is indicated in the table or S the quoted retail price. Thus, one of the functions of the target initial data block is nothing more than visualization that we want to analyze, i.e. we look at this block and see what interests us. Firstly, the main units and system for K1, K2 and K8, from K1 to K8, and the fuselage design from K1.1 to K1.8. If the blogger analysis is interested in deeper analysis of some other components, for example an engine or flight controller, then he simply adds one or more additional columns to this block and fills them to the same way. In addition, the function of the target initial data block is that we define in the composition of the structural model, which is one of the key concepts of the value analysis, which actually determines the degree of abstraction of the analysis. If we turn to the theoretical releases and practical cases presented on the value analysis for Cost Engineers channel, we see that the structural model was performed separately, but in the case of an analysis for a product review, I suggest some alternative version of the combined initial data table and structural model. The combined model TOPS is named due to the fact that it contains a tabular model that combines a number of different models both in essence and in the methods of their definition. In particular, indicators of the significance and relevance and the degree of satisfaction, determined in the case of a product review by a blogger, using the expert assessment method, as well as indicators such as quality of implementation, the price of retail network, in the retail network, absolute and relative price, determined according to formulas or information market conditions, prices obtained from the open sources. Students of the course Professional Analytics and Blogging will learn about the nuances of filling of the combined tabular model, value analysis and reviews and unboxing can be found as part of a more detailed analysis of today's case, as well as during the training section, which includes independent work on creating a review for the product product of interest to the listener. Additionally, I would like to mention the following. In the following examples of reviews using a two-stage model for generating analytics, classic review and value analysis review, we will encounter a situation where there is no initial data to fill in the S column and the general ID and structural model tab, and accordingly to the combined model tab. Today's example is rather an exception, since the sum of the price of individual components in a retail network turns out to be close to the price of a drone assembly. In the case of some other drones, or for example with a smartphone, firstly, there will be no such correspondence, and secondly, they will simply by the no information about the price of some components. The way out of the situation is quite manual. We simply do not fill in the column with prices S, and accordingly we work only with the value of significance and relevance, satisfaction and quality of implementation and degree of novelty, which is in most cases is more than enough. Accordingly, the RQS diagram, which will be discussed below, turns into RQ diagram for individual cases with a slight movement of the band, which however, it's not much worth as the original version. The expert evaluation methods used to determine the relative values of the significance, the relevance R, and the degree of satisfaction P, presented in the combined model way very dependent on the object and objectives of the analysis, as well as the format of review. As part of the training course, Professional Analytics and Blogging, Value Analysis in Reviews and Unboxing, applies the following classification formats. First, shorts, reels and long reels, etc. Duration from 1 to 3 minutes. Second format, standard review, duration from 3 to 15 minutes. And extended review, duration of more than 20 minutes. Since today's case has a duration more than 20 minutes, and according to the degree of saturation with analytics, it definitely corresponds to third type of extended, i.e. the extended review. The list of expert methods used is as large as possible and includes expert evaluation methods from 1st to 5th and from 7th to 12th method. Accordingly to the most modest, the format a blogger chooses for review the few techniques he usually uses, which in turn directly affects the degree of reliability of the analysis. Perhaps that is why, for example, I always have a certain oppressive feeling of understatement and bias when in the format of shorts of reels they're trying to cram in some kind of analytics. For example, on a smartphone, which is generally speaking a rather complex device, in turn, shorts or reels in which there is no quasi-analytical audio sequence, but the smartphone was simply opened, closed, and shown how it looks in the hand, glitters in the sun, and how drops on the water glisten on it, and how falls on concrete, but doesn't break, do not leave such oppressive feelings. Perhaps because that they actually belong to the format of advertisement videos or promotional videos and not bloggers' reviews.
Regarding the definition of the indicators of significance, relative relevance, and relative satisfaction on the basis of which the quality implementation indicator can be calculated, the following should be noted. As part of the cost engineering course, see issues 11 and 12, the methods for determining these indicators were outlined, and their application is obviously well founded within the framework of the working group or of a real project. The specificity of the using these methods by a blogger analyst lies in the fact that the listener, in this case, isn't interested in what methods of determining the importance of the quality of implementation were used, but what opinion a particular blogger has on this issue, or more precisely, the listener is interested in the individual preferences of a particular blogger. This approach is a logical continuation of the leadership concept taught in the typical course of novice bloggers, greenhorn bloggers, which briefly boils down to the fact that a blogger should become an opinion leader or an influencer. Such an approach, in my opinion, is logical, including from the pedagogical point of view, since it allows a novice blogger to gradually enter into material and move from a simple approach to determining the indicators of the relevance and the degree of satisfaction, more complex through the methods used by analysts in real projects, and reviewed in issues 11 and 12 of the cost engineering training course. Nevertheless, a blogger still needs a certain methodological basis to set the indicators of the significance and indicators of relevance and the degree of satisfaction by forming and justifying his expert evaluation or individual preferences of blogger. And it's for this purpose that we analyzed in such detail the table of methods of expert assessment and the framework in the first section of today's issue.
Let's look at the ArcUS diagram tab and the interpretation of the data presented on it. The functions on the ArcUS tab is to visualize and the information comply to the combined model tab, which we discussed above. In the case of value analysis, it's through the analysis of visualization results that an indicator such as design balance is evaluated. The principle of evaluating balance is extremely simple. If the columns ArcUS have approximately the same level, then the design balance is extremely simple, is balanced, and no improvements are required. If we have a significant discrepancy, at least one of three parameters, such as in the case of plugs, buffers, and vibration supports for our drone, then this component should be further analyzed and possibly changed. I suggest not delving further into the analysis and ArcUS diagram, since there are exceptions to its interpretation, such as fasteners, etc. In general, this is a completely different story, which is used by design engineers, designers, industrial designers, cost engineers, and etc. In this case, we are not acting as a design engineer but a review blogger, therefore we should be interested only in those indicators that are interesting and, most importantly, understandable to the consumer. Therefore, as part of a review of unpacking, the formulation of conclusions based on the results of the analysis of the RQS diagram may look something like this. First, at the top level of the analysis, the level of the main units and systems of the drone, we see a significant deviation in the S parameter to the retail price of the harnesses and connectors component. However, these deviations are toward the buyer, i.e., conditional we buy more relevance and quality of implementation for less money. In addition, the harnesses and connectors component isn't expensive and isn't inconsumable, then therefore doesn't have a significant impact on the consumer cost during the life cycle. For the DJI O3 video module component, the situation is reversed. Its price as part of the drone is overestimated by about 25% compared to its importance. However, since it's also not a consumable, the consumer actually overpays for $50 only once when buying a drone. At the level of the fuselage, the most significant deviation we see a deviation of the S parameter and retail price for the components, plugs, buffers, and vibration supports, and battery mounting brackets. The logic here is the same as in the previous paragraph deviation. In favor of the consumer, the components are not expensive and are not consumable, and therefore do not have a significant impact on consumer cost during the life cycle. We see significant deviation in the Q performance indicator for the two components, secondary frame and plugs, buffers, and vibration supports, which generally corresponded to the results of classical analysis performed, the first block of our review, or classical review, the conclusions of which was that secondary frame is complete garbage. Hired to its design engineer, and as well as the landing gear supports along the standard buffers. In general, everything is logical, since the satisfaction indicators for the secondary frame and buffers I put down according to the results of the classical review. However, sometimes satisfaction indicators are set based on the other criteria, i.e. without disassembling the object of review, and that's operation, for example, during unpacking, and in this case, the results of the analysis of the RQS diagram can hardly be overestimated.
The issue of interpretation of the RQS diagram will be discussed below in the conclusions sections. However, I would like to note that following the indicators of the relevance and the degree of the satisfaction can be determined by another methods, by involving an external independent expert. In this case, we are talking about the case when a blogger who specializes in smartphones, for example, or doesn't specialize in anything at all, due to the fact that he does not understand anything, or is conditional greenhorn blogger, quite accidentally receives an invitation to participate in an affiliate program. For example, participating is an affiliated program for promoting bicycles, or motorcycles, or drones. Accordingly, within the framework of this partner program or affiliate program, specialists in the specified type of products can be involved, for example, a cyclist, biker, or air hobby enthusiast, who will provide the blogger with a paid service to determine the indicators of the relevance and the degree of satisfaction by expert evaluation. The expert, in turn, in such a situation must have the skills discussed in today's issue. In general, we are returned to the group review for mentioned above, with all its advantages and disadvantages. In addition, it's possible to involve an analyst in addition to a specialist in the specified type of products who, being behind the scenes, will undertake all the analytical work, i.e. technical and economic parts, determining the relevance and the degree of satisfaction, and drawing conclusions based on the results of the review. The blogger. Similar services can be provided as part of our project. Contacts for those interested in these services are indicated in the presentation of training program. professional analytics in blogging, value analysis and reviews and unboxing that presented in a VA for Cost Engineers channel. Let's move to the next example of using value analysis tools, namely determine the degree of novelty compared to the analog of the previous generation. This tool will be used in today's review and demo mode, since the direct predecessor of Signboard 25 wasn't in my review and I will not able to compare these two models. I will compare the Signboard 25 with a conditional not exist base model of the previous generation, for example the Signboard 24, which had, for example, a WOS camera and flight sensor. The controller, just to demonstrate the capabilities of this product review tool, if JBRC launches next generation Signboard 25 on the market and it gets to me for review, then we'll be able to use this tool for 100% correctly. I hope this happens. My mail in the description of the channel. In general, JBRC, I'm waiting for a letter for you, or better yet, a parcel. The technology for determining the degree of novelty based on structural and functional model was considered by us in practical case number 2 of the Cost Engineering training course, where we formed a technical specification or technical assignment. Based on a table of analogs, structural and functional model, and the section technical and economic indicators of the technical specification presented, a table calculating the degree of novelty for the main components of unmanned aircraft vehicle being developed. In general, this method of determining the degree of novelty is, in my opinion, extremely useful for the bloggers, reviewers, or unpackers, since the continuity of generation today is characteristic not only for manufacturers of drones and cars, but also manufacturers of smartphones, laptops, household appliances, etc.
The second, determining the degree of novelty relative to the previous generation or analogs. The standards form for determining the degree of novelty of a product, as you can see, has some similarities with the form of general initial data. In terms of displaying the structural component model of the object of analysis, the materials used in the manufacturing technology. Actually, the purpose of forming the sections of the initial data was first, formation of analytics within the framework of the classical review, and the second, used to evaluate the degree of novelty of the drone. The table for determining the degree of novelty consists of two blocks: initial data for assessing novelty and the novelty indicators. To form the next part of the next review as well as conclusions, the blogger can make full use of both blocks of the table, since the first contains qualitative indicators, structural material model of purchase and standard products, manufacturing technology, and the second contains quantitative ones, namely local end-to-end degrees of novelty. Let's look to the blocks of the novelty table in more detail. So, the principle of determining the degree of novelty relative to a previous generation product implemented to the initial data for novelty assessment block has already been considered at the level of technical assignment formation, i.e. at the level of design engineer in practical case number 2. In the case of a video reviewed by a blogger, the methodology may be somewhat simplified. By the general similar, we see two Signboard 25 and Signboard 25 products, with 24 and 25 Signboard 25 products, which have differences in composition of equipment and structural materials in 5 positions. The positions are highlighted in different colors. Among other things, the manufacturing technology has changed for the fastening strap, as combined width has been added, through which Kevlar threads appeared in the strap. To be honest, I've tried similar combination straps with both Kevlar and rubberized inserts in general, and in my opinion, it's complete bullshit. They are thicker, they are inconvenient to tighten, because rubberized inserts present tightening. I thought they should, according to the design engineer's idea, fix and the battery more firmly. In general, I came to the conclusion that the classic thin strap is the most convenient for me, which, by the way, JBRC includes in the standard, and there are two lengths for different batteries, In general, it's a small thing, but it's nice. Thanks them for that. In addition, the initial data for novelty evaluation block includes indicator of the relative importance of the component to the object of analysis that we have already calculated, and will not dwell on the list of methods for determining them again. The novelty indicators block, in turn, consists of two columns, local degree of novelty and the end-to-end degree of novelty. Local degree of novelty is another parameter. In addition to the above-mentioned significance, relevance, and degree of satisfaction, which are determined based on expert assessment either by a blogger and involved expert. Thus, the column local degree of novelty is filled in manually based on the result of expert assessment. The methods of expert assessment used to determine the local degree of novelty may vary depending on the object of the analysis. In today's case, the following methods were used: expert evaluation methods from the 2nd to the 5th, and from the 7th to the 12th. Next, based on the values of the relative relevance and the local degree of novelty, we calculate the end-to-end degree of novelty. Based on the calculated value of the end-to-end degree of novelty, the bloggers can formulate the following conclusion. First, the relative novelty of signboard 25 relative to signboard 24 is 23.76%, which is value close to optimal based on the assumption that the novelty value of 20% avoids significant risks when introducing a new generation of product to the market, and at the same time keeps the value of product satisfaction at the level close to 100%. The video model, flight controller engines, and RF transmitter with antenna have the greatest weight and the calculated value of the degree of novelty. Therefore, it can be concluded that in relation to the product, the manufacturer achieves the required value to the degree of novelty solely due to the purchased products, not due to its own developments, i.e., in fact, is an integrator. General conclusions to the degree of novelty tab. The signboard 25 model meets the general requirements for the product in terms of the degree of novelty due to the integrated equipment, external purchased parts. However, it doesn't carry any innovations in the field of the drone construction, as evidenced by the absence of any innovation in the design of the fuselage elements. So, the final stage of any review is the formulation of conclusions based on the results of the application of various methods of analysis, in our case, the method of classical review with expert assessment and the review using value analysis tools. It just so happens that we started with the formulation of the conclusions from the end, and I have nothing to add to the section overview using the tools of the value analysis. Let's consider a table with general conclusions on section 1 on the results of a conditional classical review, which mainly presents the results of the first block of our analysis, as well as partly the results of the analysis of the by the value analysis tools, in particular the assessment of the degree of satisfaction, P. Generally speaking, satisfaction assessments is performed not only within the framework of the value analysis, but also within the framework our marketing analysis and qualitative management analysis. But this is firstly a complete different story, and secondly, those who are interested in this can learn more about the course Cost Engineer presented on our channel, which covers a much wider range of issues compared to the course for the bloggers. So, I do not comment on the left part of the table on the conclusions on section 1 tab, which shows the product structure, because this is the third time we have seen it today. Only of my good friends with whom he worked together, we worked together for several years, mainly engaged in forming various types of tables. Jokingly says every time we met that I will never engage in serious business, and he did, and I will remain a table specialist for the rest of my life. In general, so that he does not to disappoint, I have partly complied the conclusions of section 1 in tabular format. Thus, the identified design flaws block on the table is nothing more than a compilation to brief formulation of the flaws that I mentioned in the framework of the classical review and the first section of today's case. Among other things, in this block, I have introduced some shortcomings of the system plan which are presented on all drawings and which didn't affect the setting of the degree of satisfaction. Such disadvantages include, for example, unscrewing fastener from vibration loads, and etc. The fasteners on the detachable connections of the drone have no contour, and therefore the fasteners are unscrewed. And on the Signboard 25 almost all the screws are installed so they do not fall out, except for the 4 that attach the video model unit. They are fall out. Let's move on the final right-hand side on the table. The price taking into account relative satisfaction column shows a price that can be conditionally called the real price of drone. In fact, it shows how much this drone would cost in this world were perfect. The columns service life, number of workouts, life cycle, number of workouts, and life cycle cost units and additional life cycle costs in dollars contain information of calculating costs that the manufacturer prefers not to inform you about when buying a drone, namely the cost of consumables. I have calculated the expense based on my operational experience, but on the whole, I think it's quite correct. As we can see, if we consider the life cycle to be 1 year, then during this period the one-time costs amount $650, which is about 1.5 times the cost of a drone. In addition to the specified amount, you can safely add about $400 per year for 2 sets of batteries. I am generally silent about one-time costs in the form of remote control, glasses, chair, light filters, and other small things, because today we're analyzing only the amount that you can transfer to Jeopardy brand development fund and not to entire list of manufacturers in this consumer segment.
In conclusion, I would like to focus once again on the versatility of the set of analytical tools that you will receive if you complete the training course Professional Analytics and Blogging, Value Analysis and Reviews and Unboxing. First, you will be able to make an overview similar in terms of degree of saturation of analytical data to our today's review. Secondly, you gain more freedom to choose the direction for reviews, both if you only choose the appropriate topic and if you realize that you made a mistake with a topic and want to charge it. Moreover, after completing our course, you acquire analytical skills that can be used for online blogging, but in other fields of activity, including engineering, economic analysis, and management. In order not to be unfounded, I will give a couple specific examples of how acquired skills can be used outside of such a specific fields of activity as blogging. In the case of independent activity, you can provide educational or consulting services. For example, for the selection of any technically complex or expensive objects, as well for the formation of a list of requirements, for example, specification or technical assignment for the functionality of the project. The algorithm in this case may be as follows. First, conducting a survey for the customer, forming structural and functional models of his preferences, determining the current degree of the satisfaction. Second, construction the OQS diagram based on the model of customer preferences and product models. Third, performing a comparative analysis of OQS diagram of customer preferences and product of the market, followed by the selection of the product that best meets the requirements. If the customer himself doesn't know what he wants, the sequence of actions and the first and the second stages can be reversed. In general, the variety of application of the analytical tools we have considered depends on your personal experience, skills, and field of activity. In terms of working as an employee, you can use your skills as part of your duties of a cost engineer. No comments here, almost the entire content of our channel is devoted to this issue. It's possible to work as a procurement specialist or buyer, in particular to support commercial negotiation, because no one but you will be able to prepare an analysis in a short time and prepare a presentation providing that there is no actual novelty in significant components, but the price was increased by 2 times, and etc. By the way, issue number 18 will be devoted to the issue of supporting commercial negotiations. It's named Commercial Negotiations in the Context of Design to Cost Methodology, which you can watch on the VA for Cost Engineers channel. Perhaps the list of an analytical data generated within the framework of today's case study will seem to someone excessive or overloaded. For a format such as video review or unpacking, the complexity of creating analytics is overestimated, and the risks that the audience will not be able to perceive the materials are excessive. However, in this case, I would like to draw the attention once again that the fact that technique and this methodology is only a tool for creating comprehensive analytics. Only 30 or 20 or even 5% of which will be eventually be included in the product review. Thus, the blogger has the freedom of creative choice, coupled with the 100 original material confirmed by analytical calculations. As a result, you create competitive content that stands out vividly from bloggers who are using standard analytics and visualization tools. That's all for today. Sign up for our training course, subscribe to the channel, use value analysis tools. All bye!